Okay, so just do me a favor and picture a giant pizza. And this huge pizza represents all of music theory. Now, in order to write and produce music professionally at the industry standard, you really only need to know a relatively small slice of this pizza. Most of it is pretty unnecessary, and after 15 years of writing music and 10 years producing professionally, I'm gonna give you the exact amount of music theory that you need in order to make incredible music. Feel free to watch this video multiple times if you need. You can take notes if you want to, or if you have a piano in front of you, or your software like Ableton or Logic open, it's gonna help you learn it even faster. Also, if you're watching this video and you're thinking, I really like this teaching style, and you feel like it's really helpful for you, I do have a paid course, and this video is actually part of that paid course. So if you wanna keep going, you got some options, and I'll tell you about it at the end of this video. But let's get right into the music theory. All right, so hopefully by the end of this music theory section of the course, this whole piano roll and keyboard won't be so intimidating anymore, and you'll know your way around it just like a pro. A piano roll may look like a lot of notes, but it's really just 12 notes that repeat over and over. You'll get the hang of it in no time. Okay, so let's start with the notes. All music is made up of 12 notes. The white keys, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and the black keys, B flat, D flat, E flat, F sharp, and A flat. The distance between two notes that are right next to each other is referred to as a half step. So for example, from A to B flat, this is a half step. And the distance between two notes that are one note away from each other is called a whole step. So from A to B is a whole step, but from B to B flat is a half step. Whole step, half step. Now all of these black notes, they can be referred to as either sharps or flats. To keep it simple for this course, we're going to refer to all of them as flats except for F sharp right here. So an easy way to remember the names of the black notes is start with a white note like B for example, and then if you fall down flat from B, that's a B flat. So for example, E, if we fall down flat a half step, that's E flat. So there's A and a half step below that is A flat, B, then there's B flat, D has D flat below it, E has E flat below it, and then for F sharp, it can be either G flat or it can be F sharp. But it's more simple just to call them all flats except for F sharp. That's the way a lot of music is written and notated anyway, so it'll keep things simple for you. So let's just review the names of all the notes really quickly. We have A, B flat, B, C, D flat, D, E flat, E, F, F sharp, G, A flat, and then back to A. From this A to this A, that's called an octave. Octaves are 12 notes apart. They're also the same note, one is just higher and one is just lower. These are all over the piano. The reason why these notes sound the same is because this A is at 440 Hertz and this A is at 880 Hertz. So it doubles as it goes up and it gets cut in half as it goes down. So now that you know the 12 notes that all Western music is made up of, it's time to start learning scales. I think of this as what notes sound good together chronologically. Just to make things easy for you, it's helpful to remember that the black notes are in sets of 3 and sets of 2. Now if you go to any set of 2 black notes on the piano and just go to the first white note to the left of those, so this note, that's the C note. So this is C, this is C, this is C. They're all an octave apart, and they're all the first white note directly to the left of these 2 black notes. Starting with the C scale is really easy because the C major scale is all the white notes in a row starting with C. So we have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then back to C. Now in music theory, each of these notes are numbered. This is called the Nashville number system, and it's going to be really, really helpful to learn this, especially when we get into chords. So for the C major scale, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notes. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then back to C. An easy way to remember the major scale is that it starts on the root note, it skips one note, it skips one note, it slides over, then it skips one note, skips one note, skips one note. So it's skip, skip, over one, skip, skip, skip. Or in musical terms like we learned earlier, the first thing you do is you go up a whole step, then another whole step, then a half step, then whole step, whole step, whole step. So starting on the root, it's whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step. It's a pretty simple pattern to remember. And remember, a whole step is going from one note and then skipping a note, and a half step is just going right up to the next note, or right down to the next note. Half step, whole step. The other important scale you'll need to know is the minor scale. It's super easy to get the hang of, especially after you've already learned the major scale. The only thing is you're just going to move a couple notes down a half step. So if you remember, the C major scale is all of these notes. And the C minor scale is going to be just these notes instead. So that's C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat. The pattern for this one is even easier to remember. The scale is you start on the root note, then you go whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, and then whole step. It's whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole. So we start on the root note, whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole. Remember, whole step is when you skip a note, so from C to D, and half step is notes right next to each other, like D and D flat. Now, it is essential that you commit these to memory because they're going to be the foundation for all the chords and melodies in your songwriting and production that we're going to learn later on in the course. This is also going to help you be able to write and play songs in any key, because the distance between the notes are going to be the same no matter what key you're playing in. For example, if we want to play the major scale in the key of A, it's still going to be whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step. Or the A minor scale is still going to be from the root note, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step. This is why it's so important for you to learn the formula and not just the scale in one single key. If you learn the right distance between the notes, then you can play these scales in any key and have complete freedom as a songwriter and a producer. Once you've memorized the major and minor scales, then you're ready to move on to chords. Next up, we need to learn what a chord is. The definition of a chord is a group of typically 3 or more notes sounded together as a basis of harmony. If this sounds complicated to you, don't worry, we are going to simplify. I like to think of basic chords as 3 notes played at the same time. Remember that each of the notes in a scale are numbered, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in the C major scale. Remember, we have C, D, E, F, G, A, B. So to play a major chord, we're just going to play the first, third, and fifth notes of that scale at the same time. So in the C major scale, that's these notes. Remember, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we're just going to play the 1, 3, and 5 notes. This is a C major chord. Now, what do we do if we want to make this chord minor? Remember, in the C minor scale, we lowered the 3rd, 6th, and 7th notes by a half step. But since we're only learning triads right now, meaning 3-note chords, we're just going to change this 3rd note down a half step. So that's a C minor chord. We have C major, and then if you just move that 3 note right here, the 1, 2, 3, that note down a half step, that's a C minor. Major, minor. Notice that it's only a 1-note difference, but this 1-note difference is the difference between a chord sounding happy or a chord sounding sad. Hopefully you're kind of beginning to see just how powerful music theory is. And this is why it's so important for you to learn. Okay, now that we know which notes are which, what the minor and major scales are, and how to play major and minor chords, it's time for us to learn chord progressions. This is where things actually start to get really exciting. Chord progressions, melodies, and lyrics are how we tell a story with music. You can use chord progressions to pull on people's heartstrings and make them feel a certain way, both positive and negative. They're extremely powerful. I like to think of them as the foundation of the story, and they kind of start to tell you how you should feel. They set the mood of the song. Lyrics communicate ideas more literally, but the chord progression and melody can tell a whole story on their own. If you don't believe me, just listen to Clair de Lune by Claude Debussy, or Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven. They're able to transfer you to another world without saying a single word. Now, we won't really be making any classical music, but it's a great example to demonstrate just how powerful chord progressions are. And chord progressions are super simple once you get the hang of them, so just stick with me. Remember the notes to a scale and how each of those notes have a number to it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. C is 1, D is 2, E is 3, and so on. Well, there's a chord that you can play for each one of these notes, or for each one of these numbers. So not just a single note, but 3 notes starting with that root note. So we're going to learn the chord for each of the first 6 notes. I know that there are 7 notes, but you really only need to learn the chord that corresponds with each of the first 6. We already learned the shapes of major chords and minor chords, so we just have to learn the order the chords go in while we're climbing up the scale. Learning the chords that work in the key of C is going to unleash the ability in you to be able to play most songs that you hear on the radio or the Spotify Top 100. For example, after learning these chords, you can play All of Me by John Legend. All of me loves all of you, all your curves and all your edges, all your perfect imperfections. So each one of those chords I just played is in the key of C. And if you look at the root note of those chords that I just played, it's C, A, D, G, but there's a chord that branches off of each of these notes. So C major, A minor, D minor, and then G major. So let's start with C, and let's look at each chord that branches off of these notes going up. So first we have C major, and then we have D minor, and then we have E minor. And if you'll notice, this is just a C major scale walking up, but we're playing a chord for each one of these notes. So that root note stays the same, and we're just branching off of it each time. So C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and then we can go back to C. So the order going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is major, minor, minor, major, major, minor. And that's it. If you learn just these 6 chords, you have the foundation to be able to communicate musically. So just to recap, the 1 chord is always major, the 2 chord is minor, the 3 chord is minor, the 4 chord is major, the 5 chord is major, and the 6 chord is minor. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor. Now, a chord progression is just a series of chords played in a certain order. For example, All of Me by John Legend. It's the 1 chord, and then it's the 6 chord, and then it's the 2 chord, and then it's the 5 chord. So it's just 1, 6, 2, 5. And we're just building a chord off of each of those notes. Or 2, 5, 1. That's a very common jazz theme or jazz progression. It's also the chords to Sunday Morning by Maroon 5. Now, I really want you guys to get used to referring to the chords as numbers instead of calling out the name of each chord individually. This is what the pros do, especially professional musicians, because it's a lot easier in a live scenario to just call out the numbers and you can follow along as long as you know what key the song is in. So we can do that 2, 5, 1 progression in the key of A. Remember, if we're in the A major scale, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the 2 note is B, and we know that the 2 chord is always going to be minor. So B minor is the 2. And then if we count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's the 5 chord. And then we know that the 1 chord is A. So 2, 5, 1. And now we can play 2, 5, 1 in any key that we want. Let's say that we're in G. The 2 note is A. We know that it's minor. The 5 note is D. We know that it's major. And then back to the 1. The reason why this is really worth putting some time into is because this is what separates amateurs from the experts and the professionals. Every professional musician that I know can use the Nashville number system. Let's go back to the key of C really quick. Here's another common progression. 1, 5, 6, and 4. That's Let It Be by the Beatles. When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me. Or Don't Stop Believing. And so many other songs. Hopefully now you're really starting to understand the power of music theory. Learning this number system will give you the power and the freedom to be able to write incredible music for the rest of your life. And it doesn't take that long to learn. So it's worth a little bit of effort right now. Real quick, if you're learning something or you're just enjoying the video, I would love for you to consider subscribing and giving me the chance to help you make the best music that you're capable of. It's totally free and it could really help you out a lot. Okay, back to the video. Now that we know the basics, it's time to spice things up. How do we take a classic C major chord and make it a little fancier? One of the easiest ways to do this is by adding the 7th note of the chord. So for C major, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we just add this note into the C major chord. This is called a C major 7. Now there are major 7 chords, there's dominant 7ths, and there's also minor 7ths. A dominant 7th chord is the exact same thing as a major 7 chord, except that 7 note goes down a half step. Now musicians don't call this a dominant 7, they just call it a 7 chord. So this is C7. This chord is often used as a transition chord, for instance, in the song Desperado. Right there. So it goes C, then C7, and then F, and then F minor. Okay, so we know what a major 7th is, and then a C7. But what about a minor 7th? Well, what's the 7th note in the C minor scale? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So on a C minor chord, we're just adding that 7. An easy way to remember 7s on minor chords is it's just a full step down from the root note of that chord. So C minor, and a full step down from this root note is right here. So C minor 7. Now what happens when we try to implement these fancy additions to our jazz chord progression from earlier? Remember the 2, 5, 1? Well, now we can do D minor 7, G dominant 7, and C major 7. Like this. Another quick way to spice up chords a bit is by adding the 2 note of the chord. So the 2nd note in the C major scale is D. So a regular C major chord with the 2 in it sounds like that. This can kind of create a grounding feel and add a little bit more depth to the chord. The easy part is that a 2 can be added to any chord that you're playing. So that progression from earlier with the D minor, G, C, or the 2, 5, 1, we can add the 2 note and that chord shape to any of those chords. Now obviously use this tastefully and see what sounds good to you. But once we start adding that 2 note and that 7th note, so like that D minor, we add that 2 note and that 7th note, you start to get these really rich sounding chords. And then the G, dominant 7, and add that 2, and then back to the C2. This is when things start to sound a lot more jazzy. Another cool thing you can do is add the root note and the 5 note on top of any chord. These notes work in almost every chord. So let's say we want to play an F down here and keep these notes going up top. And then an A minor. And then we'll keep these notes going and we'll play a G below it. So practically how I'd play that out is more like this. You can even play a C major chord pretty much on top of any other chord as well. So down here we can play an F, and then a C, and then an A minor, and a G, and pretty much just keep this C shape up here the whole time. Feel free to play around with this stuff and try to mix and match, but a lot of my piano style at this point is keeping this 1 and 5 note in a lot of the chords. I'll play a little progression to show you an example. This note is basically just staying there for all the chords. So that 5 note can just keep going through all the chords. That's just a little food for thought, but now let's get into the last section of music theory, which is breaking the rules. We just spent all this time learning the ins and outs of music theory, notes, scales, chords, chord progressions, dressing up chords, and now that we know the rules, it's time to learn how to break the rules. Tastefully, of course. We're not going to take too much time on this because there's a lot of information to cover throughout the course, and we've already gone over more than enough music theory to get you by. So how do you break the rules, and when do you break the rules? Let's start with the how. To keep it simple, breaking the rules is playing a note or chord that's not in the scale of the song. So for example, if we're playing in the key of C, A flat is not in the key of C. You'll notice there's dissonance and it kind of sounds off. Now this is called an augmented chord. So when the 5th note of a major chord, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, C major, goes up a half step, that's called an augmented chord. So let's say we're in the key of C, and we play a G augmented. That's a really great way to transition back into C. So for example, the first chord of Oh Darling by the Beatles, in the key of C, that first chord is an augmented chord. So if we're in the key of C, it's the 5 chord, G, and then the 5 note in that chord is sharp by a half step. Oh, darling, right? Please believe me. Then the 6th chord, I'll never make it alone. So here in the song, they also break another rule. What's happening is we have the 1 chord in the key of C, and then the 2 chord is always minor, right? D minor. Well, they break this rule by making it major. Now this can have a really wholesome kind of turnaround feel to it. For example, the song Everything by Michael Bublé uses this major 2 chord as well. So it's like, you're a falling star, you're the getaway car, you're the line in the sand when I go too far, right? So far that's 2 ways to break the rules. We have augmented chords, which are good transition chords. And then we have major 2 chords. These rule-breaking chords are often used as transition chords to get from one chord like a C major to an F major. We can use things like C augmented, and then that'll take us to F. And then another thing we can do is make chords that are supposed to be major, minor. So this is the 4 chord in the key of C. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? Major, minor, minor, major. And if we make that chord minor, we get this really pretty emotional feeling. I love a good minor 4. So if we play a normal run-of-the-mill progression without breaking any rules, we can play a C, then an F. But if we switch it up a little bit, we can do a C, then C augmented, then F, then F minor. That just is so much more interesting off the bat. So we just changed the 4 chord to minor, and that was a really cool sound to bring us back to C. Another thing you can do is change the 5 chord to minor as well. So normally we have G major in the key of C, and we can make that minor. So let's say that we have this progression. The 1 chord, then the 5 chord, and then the 4 chord. But it gives it a totally different feel if we make that 5 chord minor. So it sounds like this. So that chord is used in a very famous song by Paramore called The Only Exception. You might remember it. When I was younger, I saw my daddy cry and curse at the wind. You are the only exception, 'cause you are the only exception. So that's what a minor 5 sounds like, that's what a minor 4 sounds like, that's what a major 2 sounds like. And here's one last example of making what's normally minor into a major chord. So let's say we're gonna go F, G, A minor. That's just 4, 5, 6. But what if we make that 6th chord major? Sounds kind of weird, but let's play through it. This is normal. And then this is breaking the rule. Now, this whole idea of playing 3 major chords that are a whole step apart, F, G, and A major, is used in the song Kiss from a Rose by Seal. There used to be a crane tower alone on the sea. That major 6 is a really interesting way to spice things up. It tells a totally different story. Last but not least, let's just go over a real quick switch up in the key of C. We have the 3 chord, which is E minor, which gets us to F major, then back to C. But what if we make that 3 chord major? Totally different feel, right? There's that Sam Smith song, Not the Only One, and it totally uses that chord. So we have the 1 chord, then the 3, then the 6. So the 1's major, and normally the 3 is minor, but in Not the Only One and plenty of other songs, they use a major 3. It's a really cool way to make something sound a little bit more soulful. Now, if you notice here, I'm kind of dressing some of these chords up. First of all, I'm playing the root notes down here. All I'm doing is adding a 7 on this E major chord. And then this is just A minor 7. But I'm moving this note down here. If it seems like a lot to you right now, and maybe a little bit overwhelming, I encourage you to just start really small in the key of C with triads. So just 3-note chords. C major, A minor, F, G. Simple progressions like that. Whew. Okay, take a deep breath. That wraps up the most tedious and complex section of the entire course by far. If you feel overwhelmed, just remember that you don't need to know all this stuff right away. It's like learning anything new. The more you do it, the easier it will become, and eventually it'll be second nature to you. Remember that you're learning a new language, the language of music. And as with learning any new language, it takes time to practice and speak it well. So have some patience with yourself. Feel free to come back to this section of the course at any point in time to brush up on your theory. All right, so as I said earlier, this is just one small section of a paid course that I have where I'm able to go through software, songwriting, music production, and then after you can make fully finished songs, we dive into mixing and mastering, and that way you can release those songs to the world. On top of that, I'm also able to mentor you through the whole process, and you can come to me with all your questions along the way. And based on what my students tell me, it's been super helpful and an absolute game changer for them. So if that sounds interesting to you, I'll put a link in the description of the video, and you can check out some more of the course for free and then decide if it's right for you. But whether you decide to join or you just want to watch my free videos on YouTube, I do genuinely value your time so much. And thanks for giving me the chance to help you improve. Remember to stop making excuses and start making music. Cheers.